If there's one thing that I really admire in a company, it's when they listen to feedback from their customers, implement changes, and give people exactly what they want. Anker, arguably the industry leader in power solutions, did just that with their original Anker SOLIX F3800, which already was and still is one of the best whole home backup power solutions on the market. So with all of the praise that they received from the original Anker SOLIX F3800, they also listened to customer feedback and made some significant improvements to the second generation model, the Anker SOLIX F3800 Plus. Now before I get into the changes that Anker implemented with their F3800 Plus, I think it's important to mention that they're offering it at a huge discount right now with their spring 2025 sale. So after watching this video, you can click on the link in the video description or in the top pinned video comment to take advantage of these savings, and trust me, these deals will not last long. Now on the right, I have the all-new Anker SOLIX F3800 Plus, which, as a full disclaimer, Anker did send me for the purposes of this review. And on the left, I have the original F3800. And just looking at these two front on, they are nearly identical. They both have a power button, a display button that turns on and off the LCD display, a Bluetooth button for pairing your phone with the Anker app, and a car socket button, which is used for turning on and off the car socket style charger. They also both feature 3 USB Type-C outlets and 2 USB Type-A outlets. Really, the only difference is that on the bottom of the new version, it says F3800 Plus. Now, as soon as we take a look at the sides, that's when we start to see some of the major and very welcome changes that Anker made with their new version. Let's start by taking a look at the input side first. Now, first, starting with this top port, this looks the same on both units. But on the original, where it was only used for connecting the F3800 to the Anker SOLIX home power panel, on the F3800 Plus, this now doubles as a generator adapter port. So on the F3800 Plus, you can use the all-new Anker SOLIX generator input adapter, which is sold separately, to connect a gas generator to your F3800 Plus. Now, the reason why this is so cool is because the F3800 Plus features AC bypass with charging, meaning that while this thing is being charged off of a 240 volt gas generator, it can simultaneously provide 240 volt power to your house. So let's take a minute and talk about why you would even want to do this. So both of these Anker SOLIX units have a 3,840 watt hour battery capacity. And while that is quite a bit, if your power outage lasts longer than your battery life lasts, and if you don't have any additional expansion batteries, which are available to purchase from Anker, by the way, you might find yourself in a situation where you want to bust out the old gas generator to keep you going. Of course, this is also assuming that you don't have any solar panels to charge your Anker, or maybe because it's nighttime. In any case, hooking up your 240 volt gas generator to your Anker SOLIX F3800 Plus will maximize your fuel efficiency, because as it powers your house through the 240 volt, 6,000 watt AC bypass, it will also charge your Anker SOLIX F3800 Plus at the same time. And as soon as your F3800 Plus is fully charged again, you can then shut off your gas generator to conserve fuel, as opposed to leaving it running all day or all night, which is pretty freaking cool. And the reason why this wasn't possible with the original F3800 is because when you're charging either of these units with a 120 volt AC input, they're not capable of simultaneously outputting 240 volts. Now let's go ahead and move on and talk about the solar charging ports on these. The original F3800 has these orange XT60 solar charging ports, which allow for a total of 10 amps of charging at 11 to 32 volts and a total of 25 amps of charging at 32 to 60 volts. And while in a lot of situations that is all right, the customers spoke and Anker listened. So in this new version, Anker upgraded the solar charging ports to these two new blue MPPT solar inputs that each allow for a max of 17 amps at 11 to 165 volts. So where the original F3800 allowed for 2,400 watts of solar input, the F3800 Plus allows for 3,200 watts of solar input, which is a very significant difference when you're talking about charging speeds. So aside from the solar inputs, these both have this port with a battery symbol that allows you to add more expansion batteries to each of these units. And then the F3800 Plus has this extra extended port at the bottom, which from my understanding isn't something that's currently being utilized by any accessories just yet. Now let's take a look at the other side. And as we're looking at these, I do want to mention that they both have a 120 and 240 volt split phase inverter, and it can output 6,000 watts. And one thing that I think is also really worth mentioning about both of these is that they can output 240 volts with just one single unit, which is something that a lot of the competition is not capable of. All right, now you'll see that both of these units look very similar, with the only difference being that the 120 240 volt NEMA 1450 outlet on the original Anker SOLIX F3800 was replaced with a 120 NEMA TT30 outlet on the Anker SOLIX F3800 Plus. To the right, they both have a 120 240 volt NEMA L14-30R twist lock outlet. And just below, you'll see that both units have 6 120 volt 20 amp receptacles. The 3 on the right hand side are just normal receptacles, and the 3 on the left are actually UPS receptacles. In the electrical world, UPS stands for uninterruptible power supply. And what that means is that you could have your Anker SOLIX F3800 or F3800 Plus plugged in and charging while also outputting 120 volts through the UPS receptacles. And if the power went out, the Anker would immediately switch to generator power, keeping whatever you had plugged in running without interrupting it. In some situations, this is really important, especially if you had something plugged in that you cannot risk it being turned off, not even for a second. I do also want to point out, if you're not already familiar with this, that both units have wheels on the bottom and a handle that pops up, making it actually pretty easy to move around despite weighing over 130 pounds. Now, I've had the original Anker SOLIX F3800 for a little over a year now, and since then, I've actually had 2 power outages at my house where I've actually been able to put this thing to the test. So I actually have the manual transfer switch tied into my panel that I got as a bundle from Anker. So I'm all set up to back up my house whenever the power goes out. I am limited to how many circuits I can back up though by the amount of circuit breakers in the manual transfer switch. But I did make sure to prioritize anything that is important to my family's safety when I chose what to run through the transfer switch. So now whenever the power goes out, I simply flip everything that I want backed up from line to generator mode on my transfer switch, and then the Anker SOLIX F3800 or F3800 Plus will do the rest. Now, as cool as this is, if you want this to happen automatically, then you can get the Anker SOLIX Home Power Panel, which will switch everything over to generator mode, your Anker, automatically. It also allows for easy control and monitoring of energy usage, as well as some other really cool features. But in my situation, the manual transfer switch has been great. So the 2 times that the power went out of my house last year, the longest that it was out for was probably only around a few hours. It was on a winter evening, and it was a pretty surreal feeling to be able to have my lights on, have my refrigerator running, and still keep my heat on while other houses in my neighborhood were completely dark. And it was especially cool when we had to take a trip to the store that I was able to monitor my Anker SOLIX F3800 from the app while we were out, just to make sure that everything was still all right. Now, I already have a video on my channel from last year showing the original Anker SOLIX F3800 in use, but I also want to show you what the F3800 Plus is capable of. All right, now I don't currently have the cable that I need to plug the F3800 Plus into my manual transfer switch to back up my whole home. So rather than plugging loads into receptacles in my house, I'm gonna go ahead and just plug some loads directly into this unit itself. So let's go ahead and see what we can push this thing to do. So I'm gonna go ahead and start, you guys, by plugging in a Apple Watch. It's a very small load. I just wanted to use some of these USB Type-C receptacles, or not receptacles, outlets in the front. I also have an iPhone here that is currently set up to monitor the F3800 Plus using the Anker app. Plug that into another USB Type-C outlet. And right now, let's see, we are only outputting about 1 watt. Let's make sure that the side is turned on. And let's go ahead now and start plugging some other things in. So I have a waffle iron here that I'm going to turn all the way up, and we are just going to plug that into one of these 120 receptacles on the side. And the idea is that I'm plugging in loads that are going to be generating heat, because resistive heat generating loads are going to output a higher wattage. And remember, this thing is capable of outputting 6,000 watts with one single unit, and when it is connected in parallel with another unit, the F3800, it can output 12,000 watts. But right now we're just trying to push this thing to its limits, and if we exceed 6,000 watts, it's likely to trip, okay? So right now we're just under 1,000 watts. This thing pulls quite a bit, wow. Next up, we have this griddle here, which I do have set to the highest temperature currently. So let's go ahead and plug that in. It'll be really interesting to see if we can get this thing to actually trip with everything that I'm plugging in. Wow. So now we're at 2,400 watts. We are almost halfway maxed out. I also do want to just mention that when you are experiencing an actual power outage, you're not going to be pushing this thing to its limits. You're going to be really trying to conserve power as much as you can. So right now this thing says that it only has 1.1 hours of battery life remaining. In an actual power outage, you're going to be leaving a lot of your lights off. You're really only going to be using things when you really need them, right? So, okay, 2,400 watts. So far we are going strong. Let's go ahead and plug in my wife's hair straightener. Make sure that we got this thing turned on. I'm going to set this on a plate to make sure that I don't burn anything in the process of doing this test here. Okay, 2,800 watts roughly is what we are currently outputting. Let's get a little bit of light in the space. I have my daughter's lamp here. We just set that up here next to all this stuff. Let's make sure I don't burn it with a waffle iron. Okay, and 2,600 watts. Wow, we are not even halfway. So I got a little bit of work to do. We have a rice maker. Let's set it to white rice. And let's let that go for a sec. And it might take a little bit to warm up and really start pulling some wattage. 2,500. Well, last but not least, I have a vacuum cleaner here because I'm limited to the 6 receptacles on the side. I already have things plugged into 5 of them, so let's go ahead and plug this vacuum in and see what we can pull. All right, over 3,000 watts. That's pretty good. Not bad, not bad. So I want to see if I can actually max this thing out and actually cause this to trip. So I'm going to take my Anker SOLIX F3800. I'm going to unplug one of these things. We're going to plug that in and see if we can actually charge that up with this and cause this thing to trip. So let's go ahead and I'm going to unplug the lamp here. And let's see what we can do. This thing is set to currently charge at a rate of, with pulling 1,800 watts. So let's just see how long this takes to trip, or if it even trips. Okay, 5,000 watts currently. A little under 5,000. It's holding. It's charging. How cool is that? 6,000 watts. Okay, we should be tripping now. It is still holding strong though. Okay, well, we're going strong. So as far as output goes, these are both going to give you the same performance. The biggest differences between the two, in my opinion, is the fact that you're able to get a higher and faster solar charging input on the F3800 Plus, and that you can also run the F3800 Plus in AC bypass with your gas generator, which again is a super cool feature in my opinion. And again, these are both changes that Anker made based off of customer feedback, and both of these changes do make the F3800 Plus the better option for longer power backup needs. And on the flip side, the original Anker SOLIX F3800 is still a great option, especially if you're not going to need it for those longer term power backup needs. And of course, the original F3800 is going to be the more cost-effective option too, if you're just strictly comparing the cost of the two units. Now let's say that you already have the original Anker SOLIX F3800 and you're now wishing that you had the new F3800 Plus. Honestly, it's not a bad idea to get the F3800 Plus in addition to your original F3800 because you can actually connect these two in parallel to achieve 12,000 watts and 50 amps of power output and also get double the battery life. So really, no matter which option you go with, you really can't go wrong. Just make sure that if you're leaning towards the F3800 Plus, that you act fast while the spring 2025 deal is still in full swing. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more content from me like this in the future. Thanks for watching and have a good one.